Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the ongoing attempt to eradicate and diminish, besmirch, degrade all straight white heroes of the entire sort of white Western civilization, and one that the greater the iconic status of the straight white male, the greater the effort by the globalist controlled media and NGOs and so on to degrade and posthumously humiliate these icons. And one such icon is Winston Churchill. Now, so there's this is, from what I can tell, a senior high school sort of text that's being circulated around British schools, but elsewhere, which seeks to diminish Churchill and just consistent with all the modern day talking points to say, well, he was a racist, a xenophobe, he was a child abuser, a wife basher, and he was really a Nazi. And so it's very consistent with how the globalist controlled commentary, how they degrade all Western white icons, and it gives it away straight off how coordinated and pre-planned. So instead of writing about Churchill and his life and so on, the beginning point is that he was evil, he's bad. We must tear him down. We must make him look bad. We must diminish him. We must remove him from iconic status, and we must associate Churchill with everything that is bad and evil, so that nobody would want to sort of quote him as being an upstanding figure or a great figure in history. So it's very, very predetermined, and that's obvious. That and the quotes and the little epithet stories are cherry picked, and the rationale is a massive stretch that's used to degrade again his iconic status. Now, Churchill was far from being perfect, and in my view, he made many mistakes in his during his term in government, whether they be mistakes of a sort of a military tactical strategy type nature, or other errors or mistakes, or simply misguided or badly mistimed policies and so on. And so there's some rich pickings there if you want to make look bad, but some of it's quite complicated sort of policy discussions, and these people want easy. He's racist, Hitler, and so they've gone for the easy association stuff. But nearly all of it's untrue, or again a massive stretch to connect him to. I mean, there was a famine in India. Now this is a part of India that has terrible floods, and they have a cycle of sort of bad floods and famine every 20 years, and approximately every 20 years. And because one of those events occurred at a time when the British were hard pressed by Japanese military incursions in through Burma at the time, World War II and everything, that the risk of sending a flotilla to that area at a certain time was very high. Get sunk by the Japanese, and the British didn't have the naval assets to protect it there at the time. So, but this is now spun as, well, it was a deliberate racist, nakedly racist attempt by evil racist Churchill to genocidally murder Indians because he was a fucking Nazi. This sort of thing, which of course is quite absurd. Now you can go the rationale. Well, did a lot of people die or not? Yeah, well, there you go. Then he must have been Hitler. So no, it was part of the world where people died in the gazillion all the time, and again with regular famines and floods around the river basins and so on. Because the soil's so fertile there, the peasants by the million would accumulate to eke out a meager existence. And when it did flood, then of course there was large loss of life. There was loss of crops and farms, and the resulting famines and so on. So the idea to personally blame Churchill for that is beyond absurd. But that's the sort of level of accusations and associations with unfortunate events that they use. Now, there were other things. Churchill's involvement in Africa and so on. This is presented as being yet more evidence of his evilness and his racism and his xenophobia and so on. Now, I couldn't see a single sort of reference or allusion in the this treatise, if you could call it that, that was accurate or reliable. They were presenting as independent or impartial the commentary or the quotes from radical activists and saying that these were impartial academics giving a considered sort of sober opinion, when it wasn't. It's radical activists, screaming activists. They make their living out of this sort of activism and screaming racism from every rooftop. And so you can't accept that as being balanced or objective opinion. But they totally missed, in my view, the Churchill's failures. They were so busy trying to attack his character as a racist and this, that, the next thing. Now there were, there were other references like Gandhi, for example. Now Gandhi came from a very well-to-do family. He'd been given a cozy, cushy family job in one of their business divisions in Africa. This family had been well off enough to pay for Gandhi to go to London to study law and to pay for his accommodation and all the associated costs of studying. They had enough connections to get him into a top tier college. So Gandhi's hardly this penniless peasant from out in the sticks. Far from it. Now Gandhi's this kid who's sort of wandering around, or this guy wandering around without a purpose. He doesn't really like work. He's not interested in sitting in an office and processing bits of paper. So Gandhi finds a role for himself in the world of being an activist. He's one of the early, I've got no purpose in life, so I'll become an activist, which is a path a lot of sort of well-off kids who've got no purpose in life and don't seem to know what to do, and no real sort of discipline to apply themselves to a job that they maybe don't particularly like, which many of us, of course, have to do in our lives. We've got responsibilities and bills to pay. So he's quite an irresponsible guy, Gandhi, and he decides that he's going to become an Indian peasant. And so he dresses in peasant clothing and walks around projecting this peasant persona. Here's a guy who's been to top tier Western university to study law, and who comes from a family with international business interests, and and he's running around pretending to be a peasant. Now Churchill, realised Gandhi's, his hypocrisy, which is quite brazen and blatant in my view, and made a number of comments about the way he pretends to be a peasant, but in reality he's nothing of the sort. And those comments from Churchill are seized. Well, there you go. He's a fucking racist. But of course, that was very much in the context. So I couldn't find a single comment by Churchill that would give it away, or would suggest or imply or categorically prove that he was a racist in any way. And it'll be a struggle to. And he did comment on Gandhi's hypocrisy. He commented on the behaviour of some of the Africans that they were talking to about independence and that sort of thing, and how tribal they were and so on. But again, none of that was inconsistent with what was happening at the time, and was an accurate reflection of what was going on at the time. But the piece is determined, and this is widely, you can see it all, college kids in England spray painting Churchill statues, and he was a racist, and he's a Nazi, he's Hitler. And so, but none of that's accurate. And again, it requires a massive stretch and very much a super selective and very edited version of the things he said in order to come up with this utter nonsense. But Churchill made a lot of mistakes. In a military sense, when he's Minister of the Admiralty, or First Lord, as they call it, of the Admiralty, the Navy, that is, in England, his understanding of grand strategy was interesting, but in grand strategy, it's very broad brushstrokes of perception, which means very hard to make mistakes given the overall broad vagueness of the assessment, which is grand strategy. And I thought Churchill was quite good in a grand strategy terms. He seemed to grasp the wider implications of things. He's very much a man of empire. I mean, he was born in the 1870s, for goodness sake. In turn, when it came to sort of the more detailed tactical type stuff, not that Churchill planned every sort of tiny microdot himself. So he didn't. He had armies of assistants and people in the armed forces doing it. So you couldn't sheet the sum to him. But in tactical terms, Churchill sort of lurched from one disaster to another. And the Gallipoli campaign, not all his doing, by the way, but the entire Gallipoli campaign and the build-up to it, I thought was disastrously handled, and incompetence and ineptitude just everywhere you look. Then there was the going to the gold standard while Churchill was, in effect, Minister of Finance, and that was ill-timed and ill-conceived given the circumstances, and that went badly. There were various Churchill's handling of strikes and so on, labour union strikes. In my view, at least, I thought they were rather ham-fisted. Churchill's handling of World War II, I thought he handled the Americans quite well, and some other. I thought, again, in a wider strategic terms, he seemed to have a grasp, but in tactical terms and his rush for symbolic gestures of power when the British could no longer project that sort of power, and that would include sending Britain's two most advanced, technologically advanced battleships over to Singapore during World War II without proper air cover, and it needed at least one, if not two, aircraft carriers to cover it, and both these battleships turned up with inadequate anti-aircraft fire and without air support. There was no air support from the land or from aircraft carriers. So these two pride of the British fleet battleships were out there at Churchill's insistence, were out there without air cover, and they were sunk by two Japanese torpedo bombers. That went off, and so the Japanese managed to sink the two fanciest British battleships for no cost to themselves. A few torpedoes. It was insane. But these are the among other things too, the ham-fisted handling of the Norwegian campaign when the Wehrmacht was moving into Denmark and Norway. That was a just fiasco. The raid at Dieppe, fiasco. The retaking of the Channel Islands, fiasco. Not that all these were personally. I mean, Churchill wasn't there, driving the boats and all that sort of thing. But there was an endless array of things. If you really wanted to go after him, you go after him for that. His great achievements were his literary achievements and his grand stirring speeches, his ability to hold the British government together while they prosecuted the war. There are some great achievements there, his ability to connect with the British people and inspire them to sort of fight on, these sorts of things. These are, again, great achievements. But if you want to analyse his actual achievements aside from the grand speeches and the like, his great historical achievement, the writing of histories and so on. If you want to look at that, then he has very few achievements to his credit. So to put a balanced perspective on there, a flawed individual who appeared at the right time to inspire a population to undergo deprivation, while they again prosecuted that conflict. The irony is, Hitler desperately, as a working class guy, he desperately wanted to be respected by the aristocracy of Britain and to be treated as an equal at the table. Desperately wanted that, in my view. And so had the British decided to come to terms with Hitler after July 1940, then he would have, Hitler was offering at the time, generous terms. You keep the empire, it's all yours. You can, just leave us in mainland Europe, and you can do what you want anywhere else. And so that would have left the British in a far better position than they ended up being at the end of World War II, which is irony. So this is something that is one of those things, the moments of history. Did Churchill inadvertently bring about the modern day demise of Britain by effectively creating the circumstances that would lead to the disastrous multicultural mass immigration, no rule of law, no due legal process, politicized, no free elections, and so on. So that's something to contemplate. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.